Hey, Alfredo.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. All right. So before we get into your talk, so you are actually one of our meetup organizers on the Spanish team. So for those of you that don't know, we actually meet up twice a month, once in English, and then the second Tuesday of the month is in Spanish. Um, so Alfredo, you are a talented developer who is currently working as a web developer for Limble CMMS. In addition to his work on award-winning technologies, he's an expert at developing highly scalable software. He's an avid student, guide, and coach who is always on the lookout for ways to enhance developer experience through architecture, tools, guidelines, and training so that teams can produce revenue-generating products. In recent months, Alfredo has been sharing his skills as a public speaker and a writer for the NG Champions with ng-conf. A lot. Keep
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the nice intro. So I'm here to talk to you about TanStack and Angular. But before we begin, my name is Alfredo Perez. I'm a writer for ng-conf. I have some articles over there, and then also I'm an organizer for the Angular Community Meetup. I'm a front-end developer, and I have been developing for around 15 years, and most of the time it has been with Angular since it was in beta, since it was in Angular JS. So I really love to be developing in Angular. And here are my socials in case you wanna follow me. Yeah, let's begin. But before we get into TanStack Query, I want to talk about state and more especially like UI state. What kind of UI state do we really need to take care of? There are a couple of types of state that we need to take care, but one of them is a component state. Component state is when you have multiple components that they are interacting and you have to pass or have a state between of them, like sorters or filters. Another kind of state can be like feature state. This is whenever you have like a feature like tasks or users or I don't know, any kind of domain driven feature, you will have this kind of a state that is global for all these, for this domain, for this feature. And then the other state that we also have is more like a global state. The global state is the one that is used for the app wide. So if you see, we have these kind of different levels of state, right? Like component, then feature that is bigger and bigger, then global for the whole application. But there is another kind of a state, and this is the server state. And by this, I mean all that state that we need to take care of, we need to be keeping that is coming from servers. And this can be for API requests, can be from GraphQL, can be coming from any kind of server. And one example of this is the projects, templates, analytics, events, users, any kind of entities that the application is using, we need to keep a state or track of this state. So in the end, you're keeping track of all these kind different entities because you need to. But here is the question: why do we need to keep server state? So we need to keep server state to have a better UI because if we manage the server state, we can have we can be more performant since we're catching some of the data. So if the user is trying to access the data multiple times, and if we keep track of this state, then it's gonna be we can reduce the data and we can have smooth transitions. We can have also optimistic changes. So that means that if a user is trying to add data, we can do optimistic change, thinking that it's gonna succeed, make the change, show the change to the user in the application. And if something goes wrong, we can roll back the change. Also, we usually keep server state to have control of the different states that we are getting whenever we are receiving the data. Like, for example, once we start requesting the state, we have a loading, right? We have a loading indicator, then we finally have the data, or sometimes we go into error state. So that's why it's good to keep track of a state so we can have more performant UIs, more smooth transitions in the UI. And that is where we're going to use TanStack Query. TanStack Query is framework and a tool or library that has grown a lot in React, and now it has grown beyond what is TanStack Query. Now they have more like TanStack Forms and other libraries. But for Angular, we have two libraries. We have the ng query that provides an implementation of TanStack Query, but it also has you can use it with signals and observables. And then we have another implementation that is the one from the TanStack team. And this is in the experimental phase, but I think it's very solid as it is right now. And it's the one that I'm going to be using for the demos today. So let's begin to how to set it up. So the first thing that we need to do in the app config, we're going to provide the query client. So we just provide the Angular query, and we say that this is going to be the query client. And that's the only thing that you need to do. Now, as an extra step, we can have the developer tools. And the developer tools are injected in the app component, in your main root component. And they are just another component that you need to put into. So here I'm passing the Angular query dev tools, and I'm saying that it should be open by default. And that's it. That's the only thing that you need to set it up. So now let's go into how to actually use it. So let's imagine that you have your user page component. I want to point some things about this component. So we have a signal where we have the current page, but then this current page is getting used for the request options. In the request options, I'm passing the limit or the page size, and also what should be the field that I want to order by for my table. And this is a computed signal that is actually reacting to whatever happens to the current page signal. Then also, I have my user API service. That is the service that actually makes the request to get the data. So in order to use TanStack Query, we start by creating the query, injecting the query. And we have here, I'm gonna focus in one thing, the query key. In the query key, is the way that we are gonna link this specific query to the data that we are getting. So in this case, I'm saying everything that comes from this API request is going to be for the user's query, and also it's going to be linked to the request option. This is important because imagine that you have a table with multiple pages, then every time, and maybe filters, sorters, and any kind of criteria that you can add to a table. So imagine that you are going through the pages. We are keeping a state of all the different pages. So if in a case that a user goes really quick through all the pages and then comes back, if we have a specific stale time for the data, we won't have to do the request again because we already have the data ready. And that's one of the key reasons why it's important to have a state management, right? We are catching the information, and we can provide more performant and smooth UI. Then after this, we're gonna provide the query function. The query function is what is the request that I'm gonna do to get the data. And here I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna use the user API service, and I'm gonna pass my request options. And these request options are anything related to the pagination and to the pagination. So once we have this, how do we use it in the template? So in the template, what the user's query that we have here provides is a state machine. And this is really important because out of the box, now we have a way to represent multiple states for the data that we are getting. So like here, we can see that we have the is pending state where we can put any kind of loading indicator, or maybe we can pass it to the data grid or to the table to present the loading indicator inside of it. But also we have the error state. And inside of the error state, the is error signal, we have the error signal that can provide us with more like the message and the error that we need to display to the user. And finally, we have the data signal where we can find all the data related to this query. Before we go any further with this, I want to show you the dev tools because I believe that the dev tools are really important whenever we're working with a state management tool, because it provides us a way to time travel through the things that are happening in our application. And then they can also help us to troubleshoot and debug and create more efficient solutions. So if we have an application where we have a users table, you can see at the right bottom, there is a little island. Once you click it, you will see that a new window with the DevTools will pop up. And this tool window has basically a left side and the right side. I'm going to focus first on the left side of this window. And the first thing that we have here is the query history. In the query history, we can see all the different queries that have been executed in a period of time or while we open the application. Then we have some tooling to try to find the specific query that we are trying to troubleshoot, like filtering or sorting and so on. Also, we can see that query states that we have, the states that the queries are currently. So like, for example, the page 4, the query using users with the page 4 is currently stale and the other ones are inactive. And the reason why they are inactive is because the component has moved from that page and they are not active and they don't have any observers anymore. And finally, you can also see that we have some tools in the right side to trigger offline mode and some other things. But now going to the right side, here is where we have query details. So as I mentioned before, we were passing the name of the entity, users, as the main query key, but also we were passing all the details about the pagination, like order by, order direction, and the limit and page. Then after that, we have the observers, the number of components that are linked to this query. And then also we have the state of this query at this moment. So this query is stale. Also, we have some tools where we can trigger actions like maybe loading state or trigger an error, or maybe do a refetch. And with this, we can see how the UI reacts to the different states. Then in the Data Explorer, we can open up and see what data is included in this current query. So if we got a page of 50 items or 100 items, we can see them. And finally, in the Query Explorer, we can see more details about the current query, like the garbage collector time and any other things related to the query. So these are the developer tools, and I think they bring a lot of value and they are really useful whenever you want to troubleshoot or debug your application that is using TanStack Query. Now, I'm going to go through a lightning round of features because there are a lot of features that TanStack provides, but I'm going to go through some of them so you can get an idea of why it's important and why it's becoming really big in Angular at the moment. So the first thing is that the requests have a state. So this provides us a way to create like a state machines with our component. Now we have a way to have immediately if it is pending or if it is loading, if it is in error, or if we already are ready to load the data. There are other kind of states, if like, for example, if it is refetching the data and stuff like that. But I think this helps a lot to create state machines with our components. Because sometimes we forget to put the loading state or forget to put the error state, but now that we have it really accessible with the query, it's really easy to implement. The next thing to remember is that it's catching data based on the query key. So if we have the same query key and the same request options and the stale time is still not, and the data is not still, is already stale, it's going to reuse the data from there. And this is thanks to the query key. Then another nice feature is that it's capable of updating out of date data in the background. What this means is that whenever the user is doing something outside the browser or in another tab and they come back, TanStack Query detects that the data is stale and it will automatically refetch. And you can also use the is fetching in case if you want to show like a global indicator that to display that the data is refreshing, currently refreshing. So it's not something that it will just jump out or to the user. The next thing is that we have mutations to create, update, delete, or do any kind of modification to the data. And these provide the way to do modifications, but they also have the same kind of a state that the query had, and I showed you before, where we can have that is pending, this error, or is successful. But the only thing that is changing is that we need to provide the mutation function instead of the query function, but it can be used in the same way. One cool thing about the mutations is that you can invalidate queries. So like, for example, if I'm adding a new to-do and I want to tell that anything that has a to-dos query keys needs to be refetched, I can just say invalidate queries and pass the query key of everything that I want to refetch. If you notice the query key, you can pass like as many arguments as you want, right? Like I can pass to-dos, page, and whatever, like any kind of parameters. But by saying invalidate query to-dos, even if this says page, they will be invalidated. That since the primary key, the first key to-dos is invalidated, it's gonna refetch the data. So whenever the user creates a new thing in a model or in a slide window or somewhere else, if the data view, the table is behind this model, in the background, it's going to detect, TanStack Query, it's going to detect that it needs to refresh the data and it's going to go get the fresh data from the server. And this is all automatic. Another thing is that you can do optimistic updates. So now you can automatically add the new item to the list or to the table. And if something goes wrong, you can do something on the error, like event, and maybe roll back or remove it or show an error message or something like that. Another feature that I like a lot is prefetching data. So if you have a table, you can also provide two functions to provide the previous page and the next page. So this really works in tables, so because it helps to have a really performant and smooth transition. So as soon as a user gets to page one, once it finishes loading the data, it's going to request the following page. And if the user immediately clicks to the page two and the data is not stale, it's going to use the data to present it. So they will think that it's super performant, right? Like the application is running super quick when in fact it was doing a prefetch in the background. Now, another feature that I like a lot is the network mode. So with the network mode, what we can simulate is the offline and online network state. And with this, you can have even, like, for example, you can have a model that tries to do a mutation to add a new to-do and then close it and then go to your table. And if all of that operation happened while you were offline and suddenly the user goes online, it's gonna do all the operations in order, and then it will refresh your table, and then immediately they will have like the current data. So that is really impressive because you can now have offline mode almost like for no cost at all, right? And really related to this is the persisters. So one thing that you have with state management is that whenever you refresh the page or you do a reload of the page or close the browser and open a new one, you might lose some of the data and it's going to need to get the data again. But TanStack Query provides a way that you can persist this state to either local storage or to IndexedDB or any kind of persistent that you want to configure. And what this does is that if you are in application that requires to have a state right away when they load it, like the previous state, because maybe it takes a long time to get all the data. So what you want to do is that save the last state. So whenever the user logins, they see the initial state is the previous state, and then in the background, you can start to refresh data. So this is really helpful with that because it's going to persist all the state, and then it's going to give it to the application as soon as they restart the application. Finally, I want to talk about the big question. Is this going to replace other state managers? So if we go back to the slide where I was showing you all the different kind of states that you can keep or you need to keep track of, you will have something like this. You will have a state where with all your domains or entities like project, templates, analytics, events, and so on, and maybe some global ones like theme mode, sidebar status, feature flags, or user configuration, some global ones, right? So by using the TanStack query, this can be reduced to only needing the global state to only needing these state management tools for the global state. So it will be reduced to just your theme mode, sidebar status, and maybe user preferences. So what this means is that you have less boilerplate. Now you don't need any reducers, selectors, state, store management, or anything like that, or think about how to create state matchings for your different state server states, or you don't need to implement a way to have optimistic updates, or how to handle the offline mode, or anything like that. Like there, anything that is related to server requests, even from API, GraphQL, or any kind of third-party um, data provider, TanStack can be your solution for it. So if we go back to the application, and if it was up to me, I will use TanStack for all the domain entities to keep a state of all the different entities that we have in the application, and then use NGRX signal store for all the leftover state, for the component state, the global state, and even the feature state. I think signal store is a good use for that. So what's next? This is just the surface of all the different features that TanStack Query has. So I recommend you to go look for videos and go look for the documentation. Is really good. And yeah, stay tuned. I'm gonna keep writing about this. My next article is about creating a single like API service or repository service where you can handle all your state for all your entity. So yeah, thank you. And here are my socials again.
All right, thank you so much, Alfredo. Yeah, I think that's a really cool thought of using TanStack with Signal Store. I like what I've been seeing with Signal Store. So seeing the combination of the two sounds like a pretty cool project to work with.
Yeah, I think they are a really good tool together because I think about, like, for example, in this state where you have component state, then feature state and global state, I think Signal Store is really good for all these kind of states. And Signal Store can grow from being a component state to a more feature state or even global state. So I think they are a good combination there.
Yeah, definitely. So we have one question for you from Anthony. They're asking, don't know how the internals work, but what's the resource usage look like with all these timeouts running to keep track of when to invalidate, refetch, garbage collect, etc.?
Oof, I am not sure about that one, but yeah, I'm gonna have to um, research that one. But one thing that is really cool is that you can um, the query keys have options to set the stale time and the garbage collection time per query key. So even if you're doing the same query key or different similar query keys, you can tell it to say, hey, you know what? User preferences, they don't never get stale, so I'm gonna use them forever. Or you know what? This is getting a lot of data, so let garbage collect like right away, like after 1 minute or something like that. Then it also has options to force these behaviors, right? Like to clean things.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure they're doing some work behind the scenes to make everything very efficient. But yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
All right. I don't know if there's any other questions. I didn't see anything else in the chat. Yeah, Tamaj was saying because you're talking about installing dev tools. I didn't realize that it's just a package to set up within Angular. I just thought it was like, the Redux dev tools or something that you download and install as a plugin. So that's pretty cool. That's built in.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really funny to see that little island there. And
Yeah.
but one of the cool things is that if you're using React and you want to use TanStack Query, is the same dev tools and the same library. The only thing is that Angular has, of course, signals and observables, right? But all the other things are the same thing.